Okay, so here I'm just going to do a basic tutorial on using Autodesk's Fusion 360. Here it is just kind of as it applies to prop making costumes. Pretty stagnant models. And I'm not going to go into the intricacies of mechanical things in this tutorial. So just to start out, with a lot of CAD type modelers, CAD-based modelers, it's about starting with a 2D form in Fusion, we call it a sketch, and converting it into a 3D form. Now, based upon that initial 3D form, you can modify it or you can add or subtract from it, and then create more complex forms based upon that. So keep this in mind when I'm going through this. A lot of learning how to actually use this software is finding out your own workflow and how you like to take things, deconstruct them, and then rebuild them in this three-dimensional space. So I'm going to start off with a sketch. So you hit Create Sketch up here, then you could choose one of 3 planes. You can also choose a face on a body that you would create later. I'm going to go into that a bit more, but here's sketching. So up here you also have line and rectangle, but you could see them here as well. I'm just going to run down the functions. They're all pretty self-explanatory, but for some I'll elaborate a bit more. So lines, rectangles, circles, arcs, polygons. Polygon is a really good tool. I use circumscribed a lot. You just kind of choose your diameter, and then you could choose the amount of sides that you want. This is great for 3D modeling, hex nuts, and that kind of thing. So next, ellipse. It's an ellipse. Don't really use slots, so I'm going to skip that guy. Spline. This one's a great one. So if you're blueprinting and trying to copy an exact curve, you can get some pretty wacky looking shapes with this. I find myself using that quite often. And for some of the quicker curves, you can use something like the conic curve here, just to kind of, it puts a curve in a line at a specified point. It's not what you would traditionally think of when you think curve, but it works for some jobs. So next is the point. Hey, it's a point, nothing fancy. Text, and then I'm going to go down here to break. Now with this tool you could break lines that you draw into multiple pieces so that you could subtract certain bits at a time. Scaling, mirroring, so you choose an axis and then it'll just mirror it over. And then patterning, which I'll get into a bit later, but the gist of it is that you choose a path and then it will replicate your sketch across that path however many times you want it to. I'll show that a bit later when it comes to the modify functions. So before I get into the creation of 3D forms, I just want to go over this little toolbar here. Here's the sketches. It's the sketch drop-down menu. So here you can see sketch 1, sketch 2, and I could select so I'm going to draw something really quick. So I can select and deselect what I see at any given point of time. Now this is really helpful when it comes to modeling later on. So this is one of the more essential things to keep in mind. This is a very useful little function that they built in, but you could select and deselect all of your sketches at once, one at a time, that kind of thing. So I'm just going to start off with a 2-point rectangle here. I'm not specifying anything. So when I make an enclosed form, it turns it into this kind of beige color. Now that tells you that it's ready to be converted into 3D. If it's not, that means that there's a hole in your and you need to find it before you can do anything else with the sketch. So one of the main tools that you'll be using when you're doing things is the extrude function. Now this is for adding, subtracting, and taking your 2D sketches and converting them to 3D. So I'm just going to click on this and boop. See? Oh, also here's just the things used for looking around. Got orbit. Woo! Panning, nothing fancy. That there, and then zoom. Those are very important. You'll be using those guys a lot. So going back to create functions. So I've made this rectangle. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to move on to the other ones. So I'm not going to do all of these at the moment, but I'm just going to talk my way through them. So here's revolve. You can see the little picture. You just you take one of your sketches, choose an axis, and then you could rotate it around that axis however much you want. You select the exact degree amount and whatnot. I found this extremely helpful when it comes to making dome shapes, or well, any work that you could do on like a lathe even. Lightsabers, lots of lightsabers. Yeah, so sweep. You take your sketch and then tell it to follow a specific other sketch, a line of sorts, and then it can follow that. Loft, it will create a transition form between two sketches that you make at any height. Ribs, it's just a supporting rib, nothing fancy. Web, again, another supporting thing that you could just kind of stick into your model. Holes are holes. Threads, this is extremely useful. It's pretty cool being able to model threads with an easy tool like this. No need to do it manually. You have a variety of thread types that you could choose from, the standard ones, customary, metric, that kind of thing. And then here's just your basic shapes: box, cylinder, sphere, torus, coil, and pipe. And then going back to the whole pattern thing. So here's some examples of the patterns. You can kind of see how they work. You take your body and then you could have it follow a specific shape. And that's just kind of the way that goes. Mirroring, I don't need to explain that. And then thicken, you can take a shape and make it thicker. Wow, so complex. So I'm going to go into modify now. So here's modify. Filleting, it's just simple making a curved bevel. It's pretty useful in making things super duper dope. Just adding a bevel to anything is kind of nice when it comes to taking forms and just kind of stepping it up a notch, making everything seem like a bunch of individual pieces versus just one big piece with like a line going through it. And then chamfering, this is like your more traditional bevel, just a straight bevel. You can choose whether you want it to be equidistant or to have two distances, so you could set whatever angle you want. Yeah, that's fun. Shell, you can see in the little thing, you just choose a face, choose a thickness, and it will hollow out your shape for you. It's like the opposite of that thicken function that I just reviewed earlier. Then here's draft. This is pretty great. I've made a bunch of like fins and that kind of thing with this. It's pretty useful with just kind of tweaking a shape. Scaling, combining. Now, so going back to this part with the bodies, see here, here's my body. Well, when you work, I mentioned that you start with a main form and then build smaller forms on top of that. So what I like to do is to start with a main body and then have a bunch of itty-bitty bodies all around it just to increase as I build out my detail. And then when it comes time for getting ready to print, you hit combine to make specific parts solid so that they could be printed all together as one piece. You could also combine and split things, so I'll go into split a bit later, to make more or less bodies. This comes extremely handy when you want to chamfer a specific section of a body or whatnot. There's a lot of funky little things you can do with Fusion to get all sorts of shapes. Again, it goes back to that whole workflow thing. It's about being able to take whatever it is you want to build and break it down into large chunks, smaller chunks, and then even smaller chunks, and being able to think in a way that you could kind of use the tools that you have available to you to make it happen. It's not something you're going to pick up immediately, but as time goes on, it'll kind of build. So, next, splitting face. Going back to the whole draft thing, this is when splitting a face comes in handy. So you could draft just a chunk of it versus drafting the whole face. Splitting a body, again, it's used to make multiple bodies or to just cut a chunk off of a body. Speaking of which, I forgot to mention this earlier, or at least show you, but with extrude, so I can extrude a face and I can join, cut, intersect, or create a new body. So in this case, I'm going to join really quickly, then I'm going to go back to it, hit extrude, and then go backwards just to cut a chunk out of it, because why not? Just to show you kind of the functionality of that. It comes in very handy for everything. Going back to the basic concepts, it's all about adding and subtracting, and extrude is your best friend here. So moving, nothing fancy, and then this stuff's all, don't need to worry about that. So inspecting, you can measure things. You can also choose, no, never mind. So yeah, you can measure it, nothing fancy, hit 2 points, and it'll tell you the distance right here. It'll even show up there. It's kind of fun. So that's that. And then inserting, this is great because you can attach a canvas to a plane, and then you could kind of work off of that, trace it, whatever. You can also insert SVG files from Illustrator or Inkscape, whatever you use to make your blueprints. This is great. Well, let's go back to one of my projects. So here's my data panel. Whoop. So here's the Dragon Priest dagger. I made the blueprint for that guy recently in Inkscape, just ported it over to Fusion 360 and basically just extruded the thing, and now I have this. Yeah, it's pretty fun. So that just kind of shows how you could implement some of your other skills in this. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else to go over. Boop, 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 boop. Okay, so going back to splitting bodies, just keep in mind print bed size and that kind of thing. This is all you're going to be using to cut your model up into reasonable chunks. With splitting a body, wrong one. The way it works is you select your body, but you also need to select a splitting tool. So you can choose a plane, but you could also sketch on a plane first and then use that in order to split. So with this, I can make a really funky shape that I could use a key for when I want to reassemble for 3D, for printing, or post-printing rather. So just going to show you that really quick. I'm going to split this body, hit my splitting tool, and see I have that funky shape so that everything will line right back up after I print this sucker out. Now, of course, this isn't a practical way to print. It would just come out silly. I'm not going to print this thing. But it's just to show you, hey, you could split that. Like 2 bodies. Whoop. Now you could also show and hide bodies just to kind of, you know, cut things up and whatnot. There's a lot of funky directions you can take with this. So the last part I'm going to go over is exporting as STL files. So you just hit 3D print. Now you can have it sent to whatever 3D printing utility you have. I don't really use this. I typically just turn it off. I'll port it in myself. So select the body that I want, and it'll just show me the mesh right here. I could check for any issues with it. I've only had one thing go wonky on me, but otherwise it's typically good. It'll tell you your triangle count for if you're going into another program maybe that can handle more or less triangles. And then you could select the refinement that you want, high, medium, or low. It's not going to make a difference with this shape because it's pretty simple, but yeah, that's it. for that. So you just hit OK, and then it'll save as an STL file for printing. And I think that is basically it for the basics of modeling in Fusion 360. That's all I really go over with my students. I just kind of, if you're using this as a teaching resource, be sure to have your students or yourself to just follow along with the video, do a few things here and there, make a stupid looking shape. It's kind of helpful learning how to navigate everything, start figuring out, hey, exactly where everything is. And another fun thing about Fusion 360 that I didn't mention, so you can see with this data panel here, these are actually all models that I've made and they've been uploaded to their cloud. Now, what that means is, hey, I could delete this off my laptop, reinstall it, and not lose any of my crap. But I can also view it inside of their mobile app, which is great for if you're presenting to your boss or some sort of proposal and want to just show somebody your previous work and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's about it for what I'm going to cover in this lesson. If you like what I did, like, comment, subscribe. Hopefully I'll be able to release more content as I figure out more of the functionalities, but you can animate, simulate cams, that's for like carving and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's fun. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in another video soon.